of trust or affection found in many cases of kidnapping or hostage taking by a victim towards a captor. So it's a condition where a slave or somebody who's kept hostage develops a psychological bond with the captor. So I know you guys have probably played the Mario game when you were a child growing up and the princess was taken by, what was that guy called, Bowser, or the dragon, or whatever the case may be. You can see a picture of that. That'll probably flash shortly. There you see somebody hugging a shoe as somebody stepping on them. There's the picture you see there of the princess and the dragon from Mario Brothers. And then you'll also see Homer, and he's surrounded by robbers and he's just, trying to, I think, read to them. So we get the point. It's a feeling of trust, affection found in many cases of kidnapping or hostage taking by a victim towards a captor. It was branded in the 1970s with reference to a bank robbery in Stockholm. So the definition came about in the 1970s during a bank robbery where the hostages felt a bond with their captors, and that's where the coin or the term was coined. So we see also in Proverbs 3 verse 31, it says, "Envy thou not the oppressor, and choose none of his ways." So we're supposed to not envy our oppressor, and we're also not supposed to choose any of his ways. Now we're going to take a look at Egypt, and we're going to look at Egyptian supremacy. Hebrews 11:24. By faith, Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. So notice the key thing in all this text is, when he came to years, he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. So there was a time where Moses was living it up in the Pharaoh's palace. We know he was homeschooled by his mom and then returned to Pharaoh's daughter. Yeah? But he got to a point where he came of years that he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. And that's going to be important as we go through. So, how long did it take Moses, Prophet Moses, to realize his calling? How long did it take Moses from the tribe of Levi to realize his calling? Acts 7 verse 20 to 24. In which time Moses was born and was exceeding fair and nourished up in his father's house 3 months. And when he was cast out, Pharaoh's daughter took him up and nourished him for her own son. And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of Harvard, Yale, Oxford, of the Egyptians, and was mighty in words and in deeds. And when he was full, I like the way the Bible says full, Could have just said 40. It says, and when he was full, 40 years old, it came to his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. And seeing one of them suffer wrong, he defended him and avenged him that was oppressed, and smote the Egyptian. So, question: what age did Moses visit his people? How long did it take him to see the error of his education? Upon this revelation, what was his response? This is why I believe that it's essential and crucial that we must be patient when presenting truth. Uncle Malcolm X says, don't look down on anybody for not knowing or doing what you do now, because there was a time when you didn't know or do what you do now. Sometimes when we get truth, we beat people over the head and want them to get it instantaneously, not knowing that they've been in a school of Oxford and Yale and Harvard for 40 years, and it's hard for them to shake that affinity towards that lifestyle. Hence why we see in two places, and we could probably find more, Galatians 6 verse 9, it says, let us not be weary in well doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. Again, 2 Thessalonians 3:13, but ye, brethren, be not weary in well doing. This indicates to me that unless you want to see a fast turnover when you're witnessing, you want to have some GMO, like believers in you, then that's the process you're going down. But to get authentic believers in you, it's a tedious process, and it's one that can only be won over by, pardon the cheese, but by love, and nurturing, the same way you nurture a plant. So check this now. It took Moses a full 40 years, It says, and he was a full 40 years old. It came into his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. What did he reject, and was Moses ready? Esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. Let me read that again. Esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. So, what did Moses have to give up when he left Egypt? I mean, he was Harvard educated. He was, he was Oxford educated. Egypt was the superpower, the world power at that time, so he had the best education. He was next in line to be somebody of great, ranking, someone of great reputation. So what did he have to forsake being in Egypt? Was it just, because he knew who he was for all intents and purposes. But what did he have to give up? Paul says we must die to self. What did Moses have to die to? He didn't die literally, but he had to die to certain things that he was accustomed to. So he had to die to perhaps false education of Egypt, the false deities of Egypt. I mean, even when you look at the 10 plagues that attacked Egypt, it was so systematic that those 10 plagues that attacked Egypt targeted 10 of their perceived gods. They believed in the god of the Nile, they believed in the god of the frog, they believed in the god of the firstborn. So all of those attacks or all of those plagues targeted false deities. He also might have had to get rid of his supremacist ideology, of Egyptians being superior and non-Egyptians being inferior. He probably had to leave that mentality behind too. He probably had to make some lifestyle adjustments as well. He probably had to forsake the diet of Egypt. Egypt might have, probably ate certain things that were unclean. Or whatever the case may be. But he had to forsake some things. He probably had to forsake some of his relatives that were in the palace of Egypt. Like his, surrogate mother. Pharaoh's daughter. Like I said, he might have had to let go of his reputation. He might have had to change his dress and his perception of what's beautiful and what's not beautiful. Not just physically, but morally too. And we could fill in the blanks, and we could go in with this, that, and the other. But the fact is, it says by faith he forsook Egypt. Now that doesn't just necessarily mean a place, but the things that are ascribed to that place. Just something to think about. Now, we know that Moses was ready. He was definitely ready to leave Egypt, because he says, by faith he forsook Egypt. So Moses was definitely ready to, using today's words, wake up, or to be woke, even though I hate that expression nowadays because it's been hijacked. But Moses was definitely ready to wake up and smell the coffee. But what about the people who Moses was trying to wake up. Exodus 2 verse 11. And it came to pass in those days, when Moses was grown, that he went out unto his brethren, and looked on their burdens, and he spied an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So this is Moses, he's come out grown, It says when Moses was grown, that he went out, and we know that he wasn't just grown, but he was a full 40 years old. And he spied an Egyptian. This guy was sneaking because he come to the realization that what he was in was not of God, and he's spying. He wasn't being transparent. He spied an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew, one of his brethren, and he looked this way and that way, and when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. So he killed the brother and buried him in the sand, because the brother was oppressing his people. Exodus chapter 2 verse 13. And when he went out the second day, behold, the two men of the Hebrews strove together. And he said to him that did the wrong, Wherefore smitest thou thy fellow? And he said, Who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me, as thou killest the Egyptian? And Moses feared, and said, Surely this thing is known. Question. South Africa at the moment, you got brothers killing brothers, quote unquote. It's ridiculous. Even in America, you had Bloods killing Crips. It was ridiculous. In England, there was post-Cold Wars and post-Cold gangs and post-Cold this and post-Cold that. Ridiculous. Check this. Let's read it again with modern contemporary lenses. And it came to pass in those days when Patrice no, let me not do it like that. But let me put this into perspective, into a deeper perspective now. So the two Hebrews were quite happy to fight one another. Quite happy. Quite happy. More than happy to strove together, to fight one another. More than happy. But the day before, they wasn't happy to protest or to even strove against their oppressor. But they was more than happy to fight one another. And you'll find that in our community especially, we're quite happy to war with one another. But seldom do we take our grievances against the oppressor. And I'm not saying in a violent way or a non-violent way. I'm saying in general, we don't seem to do anything. But when it comes to our own, we have an evil eye. We'll deal with them in a way that's it's just crazy. And I started to think why. And I thought because, back in this day, if a Hebrew did something to a Hebrew, the consequences will probably be very slim. He's just a slave. He's just a nobody. It's just a Negro. What's the issue? But if that Hebrew did something to an Egyptian overseer, then obviously that's got higher ramifications, because that Egyptian is more superior than a Hebrew. That overseer is way more superior than a Hebrew. But notice how the Hebrews are so quick to strove together against each other, but the day before they didn't say or do anything against their oppressor. And you see that Moses, who tries to save them, they turn on him. So when we have people that stand up for us, we often turn on them, or they're often betrayed by a Judas, somebody who looks and talks and walks like them. And I put these 4 photos up because this is what happened to these guys too. Some people say that MLK was betrayed by Jesse Jackson and some other people. Thomas Sankara was definitely Judas. Patrice Lumumba, definitely Judas. Malcolm X. So when we have people that speak out against oppression, usually it's our own people that will sell us under the bus. It hurts me to say that, but it's a fact nevertheless. Let's move on. David said in Psalm 106 verse 7, our fathers understood not thy wonders in Egypt. They remembered not the multitude of thy mercies, but provoked him at the sea, even at the Red Sea. I like how David put that, He says, our fathers understood not thy wonders in Egypt. They remembered not thy multitude of thy mercies, but provoked him at the sea, even at the Red Sea. Now, I'm not going to lie, I just did a walk here. Because sometimes you read the Bible and we gloss over what was actually taking place. So you had this mixed multitude of people and the Hebrews all walking away from Pharaoh and all walking away from the land of Egypt till they got to the Red Sea. So there was children, there was women, there was probably women on certain cycles, there was probably children of different age levels, and there was men. So you had a mixed multitude of people, plus you had animal and livestock. And people were starting to get a bit cheesed off. I mean, I just went on a walk with my children and my son couldn't keep up, and it was so frustrating and so annoying, yeah, that you start to, murmur per se. But David's saying, they saw the 10 plagues, they saw how the Most High had humbled Pharaoh and how they had a free access out of Egypt. And immediately after that little journey, which was a bit contentious given the circumstances of women and children and men and elderly and young and so on and so forth, as soon as I got to the Red Sea, this is before the desert, just at the Red Sea, they're kicking off, moaning and complaining. Exodus 14:9-12. But the Egyptians pursued them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, and his horsemen, and his army, and overtook them, encamping by the sea, beside, Pipharoth, before Baal-zephon. And when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them, and they were sore afraid. And the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. And they said unto Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, thou hast taken us away to die in the wilderness. Wherefore thou dealt with us. Therefore hast thou dealt with us, to carry us forth out of Egypt. Is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. So you got these guys being free, free from burden, oppression. They've just received their, what would you call it today for a modern comparable? They've just received reparations. And they've got all this money, and now they just ain't got a clue what to do. They've been so used to oppression that even when they get liberty, per se, even when they get reparations, per se, they don't even know what to do with it. And similarly, this took place at the emancipation of slavery. As soon as the Emancipation Declaration was read on certain plantations, there was, and a book you should read that goes into a lot of detail on this is Booker T. Washington's book, Up from Slavery. And he encapsulates the moments perfectly. He said, as soon as they were released from slavery, and we know American slavery was bad, but did you know that Brazilian slavery was 10 times worse, and there was 10 more slaves shipped to Brazil than there was to America? But that's another topic. But we know that slavery in the Caribbean and in the Americas was very barbaric. But when they were given their freedom, most slaves, especially the elderly and the vulnerable, they returned back to the plantation and made a contract with their oppressor to still work on their land and still have the perks and privileges that were permitted, quote unquote, to a slave. And here we see our forefathers have witnessed the wonders in Egypt, and they are on their way to the promised land. And as they get to the Red Sea, even at the Red Sea, they murmur and complain, and they say it is better if we serve the Egyptians, the overseers. They actually moan and say that we may serve the Egyptians, for it would be better if we had served the Egyptians twice, something of that effect. So we see here they're envying the oppressor and choosing his ways. Let's continue. Okay, Exodus 32 verse 1. And when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down out of the mount, the people gathered themselves together unto Aaron, and said unto him, Make us gods, which shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man that brought us out of the land of Egypt, we wot not what is become of him. So you see, your own people, as soon as they get a bit of freedom, they'll be the first to go back to Massa, or go back to Egypt, or go back to that mindset. And if you remember the Matrix, they plug themselves out the Matrix, and they realize that the world that they're living in is quite disgusting and quite distasteful. And the Judas in the Matrix is the guy who was fed up with reality and wanted to go back to live in a dream. He was fed up with being woken to see the depravity that they lived in, that he betrayed them because he wanted to go back into a fictitious way of being. He wanted to go back to falsehood. The truth was too much, basically. He wanted to go back to falsehood. Interesting. Numbers 11, 4, 5 and verse 10. And the mixed multitude that was among them fell a lusting. So there's the mixed multitude and the children of Israel. So it was both of them. Also wept again. Sorry, let me read that again. And the mixed multitude that was among them fell a lusting. So that's the one group, they were lusting. And the children of Israel also wept again, and said, Who shall give us flesh to eat? We remember the fish which we did eat in Egypt freely. We remember, Popeye's chicken which we did eat in America freely. The cucumbers and the sloppy joes and the high concentrated juices, this very salty burgers and french fries, and we remember all that. When Moses heard the people, this was and listen to this verse. Not only were they complaining about wanting to eat the fast food of Egypt, or the food that they were used to and accustomed to in Egypt, they weren't just like saying that, but they were also weeping for a Popeye's chicken sandwich. Then Moses heard the people weep throughout their families. Every man in the door of his tent. Every man, not even why? Okay. Every man in the door of his tent. And the anger of the Lord was kindled greatly. Moses also was displeased. So the people are saying, why? We remember, the food stamps of America, or we remember the job seekers of England, and we remember all these initiatives and stuff that Egypt was able to provide. And why? I don't know, This just seems a bit different. This seems out of my comfort zone, going to a place that's unknown, and it's just going to be us with no one telling us what to do. I feel a bit uncomfortable with that. You mean I actually get to make my own decisions? And man, I don't know. I feel very I'm not sure about this. So although Moses left his lifestyle and woke to his condition, his people were still very much stuck in Egypt. So these are Hebrew Israelites. They've started the walk out of Egypt. They're Hebrews by blood, by genealogy, and there's also a mixed multitude of other people there too. But even though they're out of Egypt, the mindset is still in Egypt. They're out of Egypt. They're at the Red Sea. In fact, this part they're in the desert. So we saw how they moaned in captivity when Moses tried to save them. They were moaning at him. Yeah? They moaned when they was at the Red Sea. They moaned and now they're moaning when they're in the desert. Wow. Next slide. Exodus 16 verse 3. And the children of Israel said unto them, Would to God we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, and when we did eat bread to the full. For ye have brought us into this wilderness, to kill this whole assembly with hunger. So they were saying, boy, sir, I don't know about this liberty thing again, just, why, it's too much being free. We had a lot more freedom when we were oppressed. I mean, we could have all you can eat, sloppy joes and, all that kind of jazz. But now we're free, we have to cater for ourselves and have to do our own, accountancy books, and we have to do our own paperwork, we have to do our own strategies for community development. We have to do all this stuff, man. It's a bit too much for us to bear, and it's better when somebody else did it for us. But notice, we see they're very much upset with food. They're very much upset with not being able to continue the diet that they had in Egypt. The diet of melons and leeks and onions and garlic. Now we know they're not bad. There's nothing wrong with cucumbers and melons and leeks and onions and garlic and fish. There's nothing wrong with that. But they were complaining about what the Most High was giving them, which was manna. They was upset, frustrated with the same old food. Now, Philippians 3:19, it says, whose end is destruction, whose God is their belly, and whose glory is in their shame, who mind earthly things. Genesis 3:17, we see that the things that our forefathers and our first parents, Adam and Eve, the things that they succumbed to was diet or appetite or eating things that were forbidden, or it was always centered around food. There was always an issue with food, man. Food was a stumbling block which was used against us. Now, Genesis 3:17, and unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it, cursed is the ground for thy sake, in sorrow thou shalt eat of it all the days of thy life. So we see there that Adam gave in to temptation, the temptation to eat what was forbidden. Then we see that Esau, he served his birthright for a pot of lentils. Then we see Yeshua was tempted also with bread. Satan came up to him and tried to get him to turn stones into bread, because he was fasting and wanted him to give in to his appetite so that his God would be his belly. And the devil said unto him, how cheeky is that? If thou be the Son of Man, command the stone that it be made bread. And Yeshua answered him, saying, it is written that man shall not live by bread alone, but every word of God. So he tried to do the same thing he did with Adam and Eve. Has God said you shouldn't eat it? I'm saying, if you are the Son of God. So he always asks these funny kind of questions that Satan asks people, when he knows the answer. Very rhetorical, to get people to slip up. And he tried to get Christ at his most vulnerable point, where he was fasting. And he tried to get him to do an Esau, and he tried to get him to do an Adam and Eve, to give in to the appetite, and to then by default make their God their belly. Alright then, boom. So we understand that Moses was a full 40, not 20, not 10, not 30, not 35, not 23, but a full 40 years old, before he was able to shake off the education of Harvard, of Princeton, of Oxford, of Yale, to say, why? Something not right. And start to get a little bit agitated, and then to see that the people who are being oppressed are the same as him. the same kinsmen as him, the same people as him. Hence why I say we shouldn't be in a rush to condemn, and we shouldn't be in a rush to make people rush. We should just plant seeds, water it, and God and the Most High Yah in his providence will give the increase. You see me? Alright, so what age then was Moses used to deliver Israel? What age was Moses used to deliver Israel? We know he was a full 40 years old when he saw the oppression of his people. Well, how old was Moses when he was used by the Most High? Let's see. Acts 7:29 to 30. Then fled Moses at this saying, and was a stranger in the land of Midian, where he begat 2 sons. And when 40 years were expired, there appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai an angel of the Lord in a flame of fire in a bush. So Moses, after 40 years of exile, he was what age? Exodus 7 verse 7. And Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron 83 years old, when they spake unto Pharaoh. Guys, did you know that these guys were OAPs? Overage pensioners. Doing this thing with the Pharaoh. Could you imagine your granddad just going in? A Bill Cosby type kind of looking guy age, or a Morgan Freeman kind of age range, I don't know. Probably, I don't know. Just envision someone who's kind of old. Going up to Pharaoh and saying, boy, you need to let the picnics go, let the family go. These guys were OAPs, man. So that's what I'm saying. And the thing about Moses as well, the thing about Moses, he was 40 years where? 40 years where? Was he in the city? Where was Moses? Then fled Moses at this saying, and was a stranger in the land of Midian, where he begat 2 sons. Now we know that Moses was a shepherd, and he was keeping the sheep of Jethro, and he was married to Zipporah, and they had 2 sons, yada 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 yada. But he was a full 40 years excluded in a different land, where he was a stranger for 40 years. So from 40 and then another 40, he was 80 years old. Yeah, he bumped into his brother Aaron again, and Aaron was a full 83 years old, 83 years old. So these guys were old men, man, and the Most High was able to use them. So again, don't cross or don't write off old people too, or elderly people too. I mean, my auntie the other day, I think she's like 80, I don't even know her age, but she's 80 something, she's 80 plus, and she came to the understanding of Sabbath the other day, and she'd been in Sunday church, and she'd actually been fleeced by Sunday churches, like she paid to have, she donated some funds or give some tithes or gave some offering or something, and it was to replace the church roof, and with the intention that they were going to pay her back, and they never paid her back. They took the money and they just robbed her, basically, so she'd been in the Sunday way of doing things for a very long time. She was very, had a reputation in Sunday and all that kind of stuff. She's came to the realization in 80 plus years old that Sunday is folly and that Sabbath is the Most High's day. So glory to Yah. So let's not write people off. Let's be patient, and let's not grow weary in well doing. So we've dealt with Egyptian supremacy and the mindset that the ancient Hebrews had during Egyptian supremacy. Now we know those other different kingdoms too. There was Persia, there was Grecia, Rome. But we're just looking at Egypt, and then we're going to look at Rome, and then we're going to look at modern Rome. Okay? So all of this up until this point has been under Egyptian supremacy. Now if we're going to use today's words, you could say under so-called black people oppressing black people. But that doesn't make a lick of sense. Egyptians who were of a melanated phenotype were oppressing Hebrews who were also of a melanated phenotype. So we would say Egyptian supremacy, because that is more fitting than black on black supremacy. Doesn't make a lick of sense. Alright, so now we're going to look at ancient Roman supremacy. That they had in Egypt, when the people said, if I can find it, in Exodus 14 verse 12, is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians, or that we may serve Pharaoh? For it had been better for us to serve Pharaoh and the Egyptians than we should die in the wilderness. And then you get to a little bit more of a more. So that was probably Israel. That was Egyptian supremacy 1.0. Then you get to which is what we would call Stockholm Syndrome. Feelings of trust and affection found in many cases of kidnapping or hostage taking by a victim towards a captor. So let's go through. So, just as Moses did, just as Moses, I've written this wrong, but what I was going to say is, just as Moses had to give up his lifestyle in Egypt, what lifestyle or do we have to give up now in modern Roman supremacy? So this was see. What mindset should we adopt now? And I like this quote by Harriet Tubman because it then just encapsulates the same thing that we've been saying. She said, like a type of Moses, I freed 1,000 slaves. Now this is reportedly what Harriet Tubman said. Some people say she didn't say this, she didn't say that. But if she did say this, it's a very compelling statement. It said, I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more if only they knew they were slaves. Similarly with Moses, he was freeing them, but they wanted to go back to the oppression because they were just so oppressed to the point where they were just in love with their oppressor. And I've got Kanye West as a phenotype. We're going to have Jay-Z as a phenotype, where people are so obsessed. Ben Carson, we're so obsessed that we're just we're addicted to our oppressor. So why is history good to know? Romans 15 verse 4. For whatsoever things were written aforetime, meaning in the past, were written for our learning, that we, through patience and comfort of the scriptures, might have hope. So when we look at the history, the archives, the records, we should be able to spot parallels and spot pitfalls and be able to circumvent accordingly. And also have comfort of the scriptures and patience when we're dealing with other people. Patience. If Moses had to get his woke experience, quote unquote, at age 40, and then he had to have 40 years of fasting from Egypt, being away from Egypt, being away from that lifestyle, being away from that environment before he was used at 80 to then go back to Egypt with a clearer mind, a clearer focus, sharper acumen. How can we look down and write other people off? Just a question. The world is, and coming to an end of the study now, a very short study, and after this we're going to be looking at the Sabbath and how the Sabbath, how to teach the Sabbath to other people. Anyway, this world is ultimately governed by satanic agencies. Anything that proceeds from popular culture would generally be at variance with the Most High. All primitive believers were subcultural and even countercultural. When the state conflicted Yah's laws, i.e. Daniel, Esther or Hadassah, they went against it. So when Daniel and the 3 Hebrew boys, were told to bow down for the statue, Nebuchadnezzar's statue, they didn't bow down. Well, just the 3 Hebrews at that point. When Daniel was told that he couldn't pray to the Most High, he prayed to the Most High and was thrown into the lion's den. So whenever something was popular, or a decree, or the new craze came out per se, the new culture, new craze, new buzz, if it was good, they would just accept it, But if it was at variance with the Most High's law, they had to reject it. And often when you reject something, it comes with a punishment, a reprimand. Liberty is found in acknowledging our condition, the wickedness of sin, the system therein, and our fondness towards it. Let's be real. There's certain things in Egypt that we still, to this day, are fond of, and the Most High is still plucking it away, picking it away, chipping it away, potentially. And if there's nothing, then you should have been translated like Elijah and Enoch by now. So there are still some things, if we're being honest, even if it's just small things that we would say are small, but the Most High sees it as a big thing. So, like I said, and choosing to unlearn and to relearn the Most High's will. So we've naturally got a fondness towards sin. I think there was a group called Naughty by Nature. By default, we're naughty by nature. By default, we have to teach our children to behave, our children to not lie, to be respectful. I was just walking with my son today, and I tell him all the time not to pick up anything off the floor, don't pick up stones. 2 years old, We live in a kind of a rural setting, so we're not in the city, we're kind of just ruralish here. My son's picking up stones. I'm saying to him, put the stones down. You know what the guy decided to do? Put his hands behind his back, quickly, as if I didn't know he had stones, and then subtly drop the stones on the floor. I'm like, this brother. So we're naughty by nature. We're naughty by nature. We have a default position to want to do wicked rather than to do good.